Welcome back to the Archetypal Man podcast. I am co-host Aries.
And I am co-host Apollo.
Yes, and this is our third official podcast, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you all this evening. Tonight's podcast episode is Boyhood Initiations, how they no longer exist, why they no longer exist, and why they must return.
Damn straight.
Absolutely. And before we kick it off here, I felt it apropos to open with one of my favorite poems. I read this to my son every night when we go to bed, and it is If by Rudyard Kipling. If you can keep your head while all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken, and stoop and build them up with worn-out tools. If you can make one heap of all your winnings, and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose, and start again at your beginnings, and never breathe a word about your loss. If you could force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they're gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you, except the will that says to them, hold on. If you could talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you will be a man, my son. God, one of my favorite poems. Encapsulated within it is pretty much everything you need to know to be the archetypal man.
I seriously have goosebumps and my heart is on fire hearing that. I haven't heard that poem in years, and then after, to give a little personal background, just getting this podcast started has been an initiation for me, and I think my co-host as well.
Oh, absolutely.
The universe has thrown shit at me like you would not believe. And to be perfectly frank, I set myself up for this by not being a man years ago. Not to give too much away from what we're going to get into, but I got a really bad start on manhood.
Mm-hmm. As did I.
And it's been a 20-plus year search to get at why. And I feel like tonight's program is about exactly that. Mm-hmm. Why so many men feel like boys still.
Yes.
Why so many men struggle in relationships, struggle at jobs, even when they have a job and even when they are married, they just don't feel like a man. Mm-hmm. And it's because they were never given permission from their fathers, and they were never given permission inside themselves.
Yep.
To feel what a man feels, to do what a man does, and to just be proud of being a man.
Well, tonight, Apollo, we are going to spearhead those issues, and we are going to start giving permission so that others can give themselves permission. And it's amazing how it works like that, but it absolutely does.
Right. It is. You said you read the If poem to your son. We have a bedtime ritual, too, with my son. And every night lately I've been saying, what are you? And the answer is, I'm a boy. And what are boys? Men in training.
Excellent.
Nobody ever fucking told me that.
Thinking back, I don't think I was ever told that either. I truly don't.
And my son is 7, and he knows it already.
That is so important and so rare in this climate, in this culture, this society right now. And that's why we're here talking about this, because it needs to be out there.
All right, well, let's jump right in.
Let's dive, my friend.
So in researching rites of passage, for me, it started actually a long time ago. I went to a Christian organization that did some ceremonies and stuff, and it was helpful, but it didn't quite connect, I think, in ways it needed to. But I came across the book called Le Rites de Passage, or in English, The Rites of Passage, by Arnold van Gennep. And he was actually the person that came up with the phrase rites of passage. And his book is really amazing. It was groundbreaking in the way it scientifically categorized the elements of ritual initiation. And he has a 3-part process that still holds true today. I mean, there's been some scientific study of it, but he's regarded by some as one of the people that really put a scientific method to it.
Amazing.
Yes, it is. I'm going to describe here, as briefly as possible, Van Gennep's view of the ritual initiation process. Van Gennep studied rituals from a wide variety of cultures, and what he found, that even though they varied widely in form, they all had basically the same function. In fact, the functions were so similar, even cross-culturally, that you could probably say they have a universal function. And that was to ease the transition from one identity to the next identity, or to ease the transition in life crises. He talks a lot about the various crises of life, like being born, going through puberty, being married. That's a definite crisis.
Yes, I think that's very accurate.
Death, both preparing for your own death or the death of a loved one or mate or something like that. All traditional cultures that we have records of and that we've studied, they have lots of rituals and ceremonies.
Yeah.
And even though the specifics are different, they all function the same way to help people transition from one identity to another. So he published the book in 1909. He basically saw it as a three-part process. So you had the first part is separation, which is a form of death, a metaphysical death or symbolic death,
right,
where you were separated from the old identity. And then the transition phase, or he called the liminal phase or liminality, we would say maybe limbo. And this is the phase in between the old and the new identity. And so rituals provide a structure and a path in an attempt to reduce the potential threat of the limbo state. Because the limbo state, as it turns out, is very dangerous because it's like getting launched from a slingshot. And if it's not aimed properly, you don't know where you're going to go. And you got to get a good launch from the liminal state.
Right.
Like one of the threats would be taking on an identity that is harmful to yourself and or your culture. So that's a big threat. And then the third part would be incorporation or reaggregation. Integration is probably a more contemporary term. So you're readmitted to your society as a new person, right? You often get a new name, but basically you have a new identity, which might be man or woman or priest or witch doctor or mother, father.
Right.
So you have a new identity, and the thing about it is, and the thing about rituals, one element that we're missing, I think, in our modern culture, is that in a smaller culture, that is a little more sacred-based, more religious-based, you go through a ritual, and then everybody treats you different.
Right, right.
Here, you graduate from high school, nobody cares, nobody treats you any different. You're like, I'm a man! And you're like, so?
Like, whatevs, dog, whatevs.
Yeah, whatevs, dog. And that's the thing about ritual ceremonies is you know you're a man, or you know you're a woman, you know you're whatever the new identity is on the other side, because you feel it inside, and the people external to you treat you differently.
Isn't it so funny? Let me interject something real here. In this time and place right now, in this society, in this culture, in the heat of identity politics, if you will.
Right.
Okay.
I won't.
While we're in the thick of that, nobody knows what the hell they are.
Right. That is a really interesting point.
They're searching because and this is exactly why we're here tonight, is because that's the first part of our podcast, is why there are none. There are no initiations, and the direct side effect from that is no one knows their identity. Not anymore.
Right. Jordan Peterson, person I owe a lot to. I disagree with him on many things, but he does great work, and he's the one that really got me studying archetypes.
Right.
About a year ago. I forget that sometimes because I haven't watched him in a while. But one of the things he said in one of his videos, he was talking about identity politics. And he said, it only takes 6 degrees of differentiation before you've reached variations in the billions. Because identity politics is all about, finding a group that you're like, and then you say, okay, well, this group has been marginalized because of systemic oppression, and we need special treatment because we've been marginalized and oppressed. Right. But you have, say, a black, transgender, lesbian, feminist. At that point, you're already like 1 in a million.
Right.
And then you throw in, I don't know, like left-handed and bald, and you're already at like 1 in a billion. Identity politics just fractures itself eventually because there's no end point.
Right.
It was like, okay, well, I got this differentiation, and it gets to be this like Prussian Olympics contest where it's like, who's the most oppressed?
Right.
And ritual ceremonies and the underlying idea of ritual ceremonies, which is you have an identity that is fixed or relatively fixed and benefits both you and your culture, does away with all that bullshit because it says you're a man or you're a father. Here's your role as a father. Here's your role as a man. You fulfill that, and we're happy with you.
Mm-hmm.
And you can be happy inside yourself. Isn't that so much easier?
It's so...
Isn't that so much more fulfilling?
And so simple. It's so delightfully simple. It's almost painful, considering how considering how complicated things have become. And that's the gaffe of identity politics, is that they say, it's meant to bring everybody together, when in fact the effect is the polar opposite. And it's fractalizing people at a cataclysmic rate. I mean, it's so amazing. It's like causing fractalized personality disorders in everybody that signs on to it.
Truly.
But I mean, that's so interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So rituals are common in, like I said, all traditional cultures, and they're common in roughly the same life transition stages. You got birth, puberty, and or the end of adolescence, marriage, and death being the most common ones. I think we almost take for granted how much of a crisis these transitions can be. You have a young baby.
Mm-hmm.
It's a crisis, man. Like your life gets thrown into disarray and chaos.
Absolutely.
Adolescence is very tumultuous. We acknowledge that, and especially the end of adolescence. This is my opinion. The end of adolescence, when you really have to let go. And you've got to make the jump into adulthood. If you don't feel ready, man, all sorts of mental illness and unhealthy ideas and habits and unhealthy identities can really creep in there. Marriage, obviously, is really the foundation, the foundational relationship structure of Western civilization.
Right.
And we're watching what happens as marriage breaks down. People of my son's age are likely going to have 20 to 30% of people that ever get married. That's what the projections are.
Oh, man. Those are some bleak projections.
It's already, for I think under the age of 30, like 50% or just under 50% of people have ever been married.
Oh, wow.
Whereas just a generation ago, this was 70%.
Wow.
We'll probably get into it later, but I think we've lost the respect for marriage because we're not sacrificing to get into marriage. It's just like something we do.
Absolutely, yes. Yes.
One of the things I did want to say about Rites of Passage that I found really interesting from Van Gennep's book is he was writing in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and by then we were already well into Western civilization switching from where the profane or the mundane daily stuff, or I guess we would say the secular is probably the more modern term, secular. The secular was in authority over the sacred.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
The secular was in authority over the sacred realms of life. And this is a huge switch because previous to this, on all recorded history, as far as we know, the sacred was in authority over the profane.
Absolutely. Yep.
And thus these ritual ceremonies were a way of making sacred the transitions. So, it would put people into an altered state and a little more fluid, And so the identity shift was a little easier that way. And I think that's one of the things we've really lost, is that we're doing these identity shifts now in a very secular, mundane way. Oh, you're married. Cool. A lot of people have been living together already, so they go have a ceremony to church. But, I'm not trying to sound like some, super conservative traditional person. It used to be, you didn't even have sex before you were married, and you had to have enough money to get a house, and you made sacrifices going into the marriage. And so the ritual and the ceremony meant something. And so people were much more invested in the marriage relationship because they'd sacrifice to get into it.
Absolutely.
You couldn't just jump in at 35. I've played the field for a while, and maybe I'll get married. Maybe not. It's lost the sacredness. And the sacredness was a big part of the transition in identity that made it feel solid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I really think it's technology and science that has brought a reversal of that polarity. Industrial cultures pretty much just have the profane and authority over the sacred. And like I said, this is a profound shift in our worldview, and its effects are largely unconscious and unacknowledged. I wanted to read this passage from the introduction written by the translators of the Rites of Passage.
Oh, awesome.
And so the introduction here, the quote was written in about 1960, but I think it's even more salient and important today than when it was written. So, quote, "There is no evidence that a secularized urban world has lessened the need for ritualized expression of an individual's transition from one status to another. Now, obviously, ceremonialism alone cannot establish the new equilibrium, and rituals may be pleasant but also meaningless. One of our problems is that we are lacking the empirical studies of ritual behavior and its consequences for life cycle crises upon which we might assess the relationship between crisis and ritual in its current setting."
Oh, wow. Wow.
Right? In other words, there is no scientific research on how the lack of rites of passage affects human beings in their psychology and their biology.
Well, there needs to be, because it is absolutely real.
It is. I felt its effects. I think in preparation for this, I called forth some initiations a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
I stared death in the face twice in 1 week, and lived to tell the tale.
Yeah, those are some, those are the class A initiations, I would say.
Right? And by God, I feel like a man. I just walk around, I'm like, I'm a man. And even just a few weeks ago, before this happened, I've been studying masculinity for a while. I look like a man, I sound like a man. But there was that deep inside part of me that wasn't quite sure.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Until I went through this cosmic initiation that got just thrust upon me. And I feel like a man. It's amazing, the difference in my psyche. I can't even explain it. I don't know what shifted in me, but it's a pretty profound shift.
Yeah, definitely. It's amazing. I unfortunately am still searching for mine. I've had some revelations, and definitely some initiation-esque things happened to me, recently, especially when I started, studying archetypes and everything that pretty much makes a man, and how that's been lost to society and culture nowadays with the birth of, I guess what you'd call the technological era. Everybody's like, oh yeah, I've got a smartphone. We don't need any real men anymore, But it's profound, the shifts that have already happened. But I'm waiting for my big one. But I think it's coming for me. So.
Oh yeah, it's coming. Well, and I've always had a kind of stupid flair for the dramatic. I was voted most dramatic in my high school, and just like to perform. So part of this is definitely my fault for calling drama into my life, but that's a whole nother story.
That's another story, but I mean, it's relevant though, because I mean, the initiations of old, what were they if not dramatic?
True.
The shamans would have these elaborate get-ups and headdresses and play the drums and sing at the top of their lungs. The whole tribe would gather. Right. I mean, dramatic was the aim. It's amazing how significant something is when everybody makes a big deal out of it.
That's, I had entirely overlooked that. Drama, because drama is mythical and drama is archetypal. Drama comes from the Greek, but they really formalized it. But what was a Greek drama other than a mass archetypal hypnosis.
Absolutely.
Because it taught morals, it taught you how to be in the world, which is exactly what you and I have been identifying as the purpose of archetypes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And so drama's like going to a movie or listening to music. It puts you in an altered state because using those archetypal patterns and even like musical rhythms that gets the brain waves. I mean, you can do studies on it. You can watch people's brain waves shift with music and certain, sounds and drugs.
Absolutely. What are the tribal initiations but putting an entire village into an altered state?
Wow, that's absolutely right.
And giving something as trivial as my son has emerged from puberty, or my son has emerged from adolescence, something as simple as being a few years older now, and all of a sudden it's a huge deal when all of the village is screaming your name and cheering.
Wow. Well, yeah, because the drama, what does the drama do? The drama gets you in that altered state, and the drama convinces you this is a big deal, and it convinces you, hey, you are the hero of your own hero's journey.
Look at the bitter substitution. There's no match for it, because you had that, what we were just talking about, and then you've got a 13-year-old with a smartphone, with Facebook that has over 1,000 friends, and yet it's meaningless.
Right.
It gives no initiation, nothing like that.
It gives an easy dopamine hit and nothing else.
Mm-hmm. It gives the direct effect, but it's meaningless unless there's something behind it. And that's what the technological age is teaching us right now, is that there's no substitute for the entire tribe coming out and cheering for you on your night of emergence. There's never going to be a substitute. I don't care how many likes you get on Facebook.
Right. Wow.
When you were talking about how the secular has taken over, overlorded over the sacred, when it used to be the other way around. And it's really interesting to see at this point in time in this culture, in this society, there are so many red herring initiations. For me, I tried to find my place in Christianity as it existed, right now.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. And what a honey trap. Okay. It has all the trimmings of, you're like the baptism. You get submerged in water, you come back up, and you're a new person.
Right. You got the death.
Yep.
The liminal phase, and the reaggregation is now you're a member of the congregation.
Yeah.
Wow. It fits the pattern.
It fits it perfectly, but there's one caveat to that.
Okay.
The inevitable catch.
Aye, there's the rub.
is that you're not your own person. Nothing you do is you can't do anything for yourself. You're master of nothing. You're not good at anything, otherwise you're a blasphemer. And to that effect, I actually wrote a little essay on the issue, and I was gonna go with that for a minute here. It's called Baptism: Dying to Self so you can kill yourself for somebody else. And it goes, the baptism is the theft of a man's first death, the death of the immature child. The baptism takes this death and all of its symbolic meaning away from the individual and transforms it into nothing more than the purchase of a slave for the master, the selling of the young boy into adult servitude. The true meaning of a man's first death is the emergence from boyhood and the gift of maturity that he gives himself for the good of his tribe or his family, or both. The baptism hijacks the death of this boy, the concept of God forever taking ownership of any and all works of skill, sacrifice, ownership, ambition, desire, or self, essentially conditioning the transitioning boy for blind servitude to another for life. This is a branding in the most diabolical sense, the branding of a slave. And baptism is not only the symbolic fitting for the great yoke, but it also is the careful conditioning of an emerging man bursting with strength, passion, drive, new life, and potential for the life of a beta giver. His potential is stolen from him and flung carelessly onto the ever-turning cogs of gynocentrism, his sacred birthright forever reduced to nothing more than grease upon its wheels.
Well, that aptly describes the first 30 years of my life, which I spent as a Christian.
Mine too. Maybe not 30, a little bit younger. So, but I gave it a lot of time, and I never found my place.
Yeah.
It was amazing. I never found my place, even though I went through the baptism. I went through all of that, and it just
Right.
I got cashiered out of a lot of churches. In fact, in my time, for asking too many questions or being too much of an original thinker.
Right. I mean, this might be tangential, but baptism is a very powerful symbolic ritual. It speaks to things deep. I mean, you get thrown underwater, and you know you're safe, but there's still a part of your brain that thinks, I might be drowning here. I mean, this is a physiological response. You're up in front of a bunch of people, you're nervous, right? The adrenaline's going, you get plunged under the water, you don't know how long the elder's going to hold you under. And then you come up and you breathe again. It's essentially waterboarding.
Oh,
I'm not kidding.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's absolutely right.
Baptism is waterboarding, and it triggers something in your brain. And, not to get too woo-woo, but if you believe in a spirit realm at all, you get spiritual attachments.
Right.
To that church and the elder and different things. If any Christians are listening, it's not my purpose at all to offend anybody or to denigrate any particular spiritual path or religion, because they do all have beautiful things to speak to. And I love a lot of what Christianity has to offer. Mm-hmm. And, I wished I'd had a better experience, but I learned a lot, and honestly, I wouldn't throw away the good things for any amount of money.
Right, absolutely, yeah.
It's just that I think the real archetype and the mythology and the real spirit of Christianity has been thrown away by secularism.
Yeah.
And by identity politics, by this idea of egalitarian equality, that men are just as good at doing women things as women are, and that women are just as good at doing men things as men are. And observable reality and plenty of research says no. Men do men things well. Women do women things well.
Right.
And when we mix that stuff up, it doesn't go well. And I think the real truth of it is Christianity is founded on very strict gender roles.
Yeah, definitely. That is true.
And when you throw it away, it doesn't work. There's just a lot of man-shaming in the Christian world right now.
Oh, yeah.
And I internalized that in a large degree, and it was really, really harmful for my life.
I think a lot of people do.
Yeah.
There were a ton of things that just in my time in the church and everything that I was shamed for, and it all made a huge difference to me. It was amazing how people in any particular group that you perceive like, okay, I'm did the baptism, I'm one of you, right? And when when members tell you, because of some of the things that you may do, in my case, writing stories that weren't exactly testimonies of Christ or acts of mindless worship on paper. I wrote actual stories, science fiction, horror, thriller, that kind of thing. I wanted to be published. And when members would tell you that you're a doorway to evil, there's really no way to sugarcoat that and make that sound positive, right? I tried.
Right.
I was trying. I'm like, maybe this is a good thing, Maybe I've got something to learn. And they're like, yeah, stop writing. And I'm like, oh dear, I'm stuck.
Wow. Yeah, they weren't seeing into your own life path and your own spirit.
Yeah, they were seeing into their own.
Yeah, very much so. I know for me, I got involved with certain groups. I've always been trying to explore the boundaries of the human condition and psychology and whatnot. So I got involved with certain groups that were, super worshipful and really intense on loving Jesus. And, they were telling me as a man, other men even were telling me that I should be the bride of Christ and the love of my life was Jesus.
Ooh.
and his purposes and God's will for me, and rip out my own heart and get a heart transplant of Christ and just completely throw off my identity, because it was all profane and all what's the word?
Vanity.
Yeah, it was all vanity. There's another word I'm trying to think of, but it was all just disgusting crap before God. So many of these worship songs are, "Oh God, I'm a piece of crap. Please come into my life because I am pure shit and pure evil."
You just killed me.
Damn it! I killed my
Oh,
co-host.
no.
Well, I'll soldier on by
This
myself.
became a snuff cast now.
Oh. Boy, this took a turn that I wasn't expecting.
That was dark, man. That was dark.
This is dark stuff, honestly. And I had to let go of Christianity. I didn't want to. It became a battle for me, and I had to let go because I had not been put through rituals and allowed to be a man. I was supposed to be this empty vessel that was somehow inherently flawed, even though I'm not saying I'm a perfect person, but everybody that knows me knows if you need something, you come to me,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I'll help you out if at all I can. Now, I'm not going to be abused, but I will definitely help my friends out and my family. I'd never murdered. I'd never raped. I'd followed the rules, man, as best I could.
Yeah.
And I got nothing from God, as near as I could tell. I would have a different perspective on it now, somewhat. But I got nothing from God, but, be even better, lose even more of your own identity, until I was so possessed listening to God's voice. I had a night where I realized I was almost schizophrenic because I didn't know, what was God's voice, what was my own voice, because I was constantly trying to press my own thoughts down to hear God's voice.
Oh, wow.
And I had to say, God, I love you, even though I'm pretty mad at you. I have to have my own space in my own brain.
Wow.
And my own thoughts, and I hadn't thought about that night in a while, but that was part of my initiation into my own manhood.
You went against that the callings of those other religious people in your life, and you just friended Jesus.
Yeah. Well, I did. I had that moment of okay, whatever this relationship with God and Jesus is, I feel like it's abusive. I've given so much energy and gotten almost nothing in return.
Right. It sounds like conditioning for. I mean, it sounds like familiar conditioning, right, to similar circumstances.
What could those circumstances be?
There could be a paper, then says.
Doesn't sound like, a modern corporate job or contemporary marriage. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's one of the points I hit in my essay is that there's such a frightening parallel of the conditioning that you were just talking about to these real life relationships that these people wind up in, that even I have wound up in the past.
Right. Myself included.
Absolutely.
I had a rather unsuccessful marriage from most metrics, we'll say. And that marriage is over, thankfully, mostly. But I just thought, irrational behavior was okay, and you should just put up with irrational behavior because you loved each other. And, abusive behavior, well, I probably deserved that because I was just this piece of crap that Christ had to come in.
Absolutely.
I deserve to be shouted at and have to walk around eggshells around my partner and try to comfort her and make her feel better and put my needs aside so Jesus can live in me. And I lost myself. I couldn't move. I couldn't go forward anymore.
Yeah, the great voice ever begs. How did that go for you? Same way it went for me. Pretty sure I tried the same thing verbatim in mine, and yeah, same inevitable result.
It went like a pile of dog shit for me. It got me cheated on and abused, and my child, has a divorced family at a very young age. That's what it got.
Yeah,
it was not good.
No good.
It's not good. And it made me an angry, jealous person. It didn't do good things for me because I was not perfect in the relationship for sure. And I would say so much of what went wrong in my marriage was I didn't feel like a man. and I didn't feel like a man, and I couldn't do the man things that would have possibly made it a better relationship for my ex-wife, because she has her own issues. But if I could have been more masculine and done more of the things, it might have made a difference. I don't know, but
if somebody would have just given you the right permission, which is the end game of any initiation, right? Somebody who's been there puts his hand on your shoulder and says, I give you permission to be your own man.
Right.
And then the parallel that we're talking about is somebody dunks you in some water, puts their hand on your shoulder and says, I give you permission to be somebody else's man.
Wow. Damn.
Right?
Well, that's been a great podcast.
It's like, I'll wrap things up here.
I'm going to go think about this.
Good.
Maybe a few weeks before I can move on from
I'm
that.
going to go ritual seppuku myself now.
That's the end of part 1 of our ritual podcast episode of The Archetypal Man. Thanks for tuning in, everyone that made it this far. And I'm sure everyone will be happy to know that no co-hosts were harmed in the recording of this and no ritual seppuku was performed. Part 2 of our ritual initiation podcast will be coming out soon. I start off by describing my ritual initiation to manhood, which is filled with semi-survival situations and high-speed bicycle crashes. It's pretty exciting. You don't want to miss it. If you like the content, please give us a like and hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to be notified when new episodes are put up. If you've made it this far, you are truly an archetypal man, or possibly archetypal woman, or archetypal child. And I hope that whatever you are and wherever you are, you have a truly archetypal day.